Welcome to the Explainer. So, here's a question for you. How can a text from over 1,000 years ago be seen as a source of, believe it or not, scientific miracles and also a practical guide for life today? Well, that's what we're digging into. We're going to look at the Quran from two really different angles. First up, these claims of incredible scientific knowledge tucked away in its verses. And then we'll unpack how that same text sparks this living, breathing tradition of interpretation. Let's dive in.
So right out of the gate, one of our sources makes this pretty huge claim. The idea is that the Quran, revealed way back like 1,400 years ago, actually contains scientific facts that we've only just confirmed with modern tech. And this isn't just a matter of faith for the people making this argument. It's about seeing this ancient book as holding knowledge way, way ahead of its time.
Okay, so this first perspective is all about the Quran as a text full of what are called scientific miracles. Let's actually look at a few of the examples they use to back this up, because they're pretty fascinating.
First up, something that's kind of mind-bending about mountains. You know, we think of mountains as the definition of solid, permanent, right? They're not going anywhere. Well, one of the books we're looking at points to a verse in the Quran that says something completely different, that they're actually in constant motion.
And this is where it gets really interesting. This ancient verse is being directly connected to a massive geological discovery from the 20th century, plate tectonics. You know, the idea that whole continents are just floating around on the Earth's molten core. That was a game changer. So the argument being made is that the Quran's description of mountains moving like clouds is this unbelievable preview of a huge scientific breakthrough.
All right, so the next example takes us from the ground right up into the sky. We're talking about the atmosphere.
So this source highlights a verse that describes the atmosphere as having 7 distinct layers. Now, what's pointed out as so incredible here is that modern science has also mapped out distinct atmospheric layers, the troposphere, stratosphere, you know the drill. The claim is that this specific number, 7, isn't just a lucky guess. It's a sign of knowledge that was basically impossible to have 1,400 years ago.
Okay, for our last example of these so-called scientific miracles, we're diving deep into the ocean. You've probably seen those amazing pictures or videos where two different kinds of water meet, but they just don't mix? Well, this perspective says the Quran was describing that exact thing centuries and centuries ago.
Yeah, just look at this. The source material points to verses in the Quran that talk about a barrier between two seas. And then it connects that to real-world places, like the Strait of Gibraltar, where the super salty Mediterranean water meets the less salty Atlantic, and they form this clear boundary. This is held up as another one of these scientific miracles, like a little snapshot of modern oceanography hidden in an ancient text.
Okay, these claims of scientific foresight are pretty wild to think about, but they bring up a really important question. How do you take a text that's 1,400 years old, even if you see it as miraculous, and actually use it in the modern world? How does it go from being a book to a living guide for millions of people?
Well, to get that answer, we need to shift our focus from just the text itself to the huge, complex world of scholarly interpretation that's grown up around it.
And this whole tradition has a name, tafsir. Now, this isn't just casual reading. It is a deep, scholarly discipline. Seriously, think of it like this. Imagine generations of the absolute sharpest legal scholars debating every single word of a country's constitution. That's the kind of intensity we're talking about. Tafsir is his massive body of commentary and analysis that's been building up for well over 1,000 years.
And you know, this whole scholarly tradition is built on a bedrock of intellectual integrity. Take a famous scholar from the 13th century, Imam al-Qutubi. He had this simple but really powerful rule. Always, always cite your sources. This created what you could call a chain of knowledge, right? It let later scholars trace an idea all the way back to its origin and decide for themselves if it was solid. It's basically like a medieval version of academic peer review. Really cool.
Okay, so theory is one thing. Let's see how this all works in practice. We're going to zoom in on how this tradition of interpretation actually shapes one of the most central acts in Islam, the daily ritual prayer, or salat. This is where all that scholarly debate hits the street, so to speak. And wow, this is where you really see the real-world consequences of different interpretations. Check out this example from our source on Islamic law. It's about a pretty serious topic. What happens if a person just stops doing their daily prayers out of laziness? The rulings are starkly different. We're talking everything from imprisonment all the way to the death penalty. It's just a stunning reminder that all these different schools of thought are working from the exact same texts, but arriving at very different conclusions.
And this diversity isn't just for big, heavy legal questions. It gets woven into the tiny details of everyday worship. For instance, the call to prayer.
the Adhan. You might think it's exactly the same everywhere you go, but nope, different schools have their own subtle variations. Maybe an extra phrase here or repeating a line there. It's actually a really cool example of how one shared ritual can have so many unique local flavors.
This next example really drives home how these scholarly interpretations influence social norms. The question here is about the proper dress code for a woman when she's around other women. And as you can see, the different schools have different answers for what's required. It's just one more crystal clear example of how the same foundational source can lead to different day-to-day practices in different communities.
So, after this whole journey, from a text that's seen as miraculous, all the way down to the details of daily life, what can we pull from all this? What's the big picture?
Well, you can almost picture it like a funnel. At the very top, the wide part, you've got the one foundational text, the Quran. Then that text gets poured through the narrower middle section, which is centuries and centuries of intense scholarship, commentary, and legal interpretation. And then what comes out at the bottom? You get this incredible diversity of daily practices, from prayer rituals to social customs, all flowing from that single source. It's a tradition that is somehow both perfectly unified and incredibly diverse at the same time.
So what's the final takeaway? I think it's that a sacred text like the Quran isn't just some static book sitting on a shelf. It's really the start of a massive, ongoing conversation. A conversation that's been going on for more than 1,400 years. It's a living tradition, one that's constantly being interpreted, debated, and understood in new ways by every generation. And that leaves us with a pretty compelling final thought. How will this ancient, dynamic conversation continue to change and evolve in the years and centuries ahead?